received audio from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources on Friday related to the Nolan Wells case. That recording, a call made from a teen on a boat at Horn Island on July 4th at around 4 p.m. to a private towing company. Wells traveled out on that boat with friends for the holiday, but he did not return with them. He was reported missing that night, and his body was found just off the island 2 days later. Let's listen to that call.
Right, looks like you're on Horn Island, correct? Are you
yes,
on
we are
Horn
at Horn Island? Yes.
All right, is the boat sinking or you have it aground?
We were sinking, yes.
Is it aground is the question?
No, we're not aground. We are in 17 foot of water. We're in 31 foot of water.
Yep, I just need you to answer these questions so I can get you over to the captain.
Okay.
How many adults on board?
So, there are 0 adults on board.
There's nobody on board the boat?
No. Nobody here is over the age of 21.
Sir, that was not the question. Is there a person, a living individual on the boat?
Hello?
Is there a living person, someone breathing on the boat? Is there anybody on the boat?
Yes, there's lots of people breathing on the boat.
All right, how many people, sir?
Like 7.
Ultimately, Sea-Tow says it did not end up towing the boat. Sea-Tow said in a statement released to NBC News, before assistance was rendered, the vessel owner advised that Sea-Tow was no longer needed because help had already been obtained.
Also, you think, oh, he drowned, but we don't have the lungs. When the second autopsy got the body, the lungs and the throat were missing. Now, I understand, Griff, why they took the lungs to determine if he had drowned, but why was the neck missing? When you listen to the call the other friends made, they called Sea-Tow, S-E-A-T-O-W, and said, we're sinking. In this newly released sound, you can make out somebody saying, wake the F up. What does that mean? I'm not resting till I find out if that's real. Has it been doctored? And if it is real, who are they talking to? Again, why did the first medical examiner keep that part of the body? It was not sent to the second autopsy. That raises my antenna. And we can't stop the investigation until we know. This young man was 18. You know how old my twins are? 18. And I would be lying on the front of the courthouse steps screaming for an answer till I got one.
Listen, you're a dad. I'm a dad. We send our children out, and first of all, regardless of what ethnicity, regardless of what color we're talking about here, we send our children out, and you're the only one that doesn't come home alive. I'll be damned if the Chris Cuomo that I know doesn't want answers and doesn't expect answers. You know me, and I'm going to push for answers. So for no one to have answers as to what happens is when the suspicion elevates exponentially.
Someone aboard that boat can be heard asking a chilling question. Is he dead? Yet within the very same emergency call, in almost the very same breath, the caller assured the dispatcher that everyone on board was perfectly okay. Those two statements cannot comfortably exist together. Someone may have hoped that question would fade into silence. Instead, it survived, and now it's become one of the most unsettling pieces of this entire investigation. This isn't a forgotten case buried in dusty archives. It isn't an unsolved mystery from another generation. This happened recently, and the questions surrounding it are only growing louder. 18-year-old Nolan Wells walked out of his home on the morning of the 4th of July after telling his mother he loved her. No one realized those would be the last words she would ever hear from her son. Somewhere between that goodbye and the moment his body was recovered from the water, something happened that still hasn't been fully explained. And the deeper investigators, journalists, and Nolan's family looked, the more it appeared that critical pieces of the story were being left out. The troubling part is that physical evidence doesn't forget. A GPS tracker quietly recorded the boat's movements, minute by minute. An independent forensic pathologist traveled to Chicago and presented findings that reportedly left an entire room in stunned silence. Nolan's mother, tired of waiting for answers that never seemed to arrive, took matters into her own hands and walked into a courthouse determined to force the next chapter of this case forward. Then came something even more disturbing. Buried inside an archived maritime emergency recording, stored for months by a private marine communications company, investigators and independent reviewers identified several background sounds that appear inconsistent with the public version of events described by the people aboard that vessel. Those sounds have sparked new questions, reopened old ones, and intensified scrutiny over what may have unfolded on the water that day. We're not here to invent theories or chase internet rumors. Everything you're about to hear comes from documented records, publicly available filings, official statements, forensic reporting, or evidence that has been independently discussed by qualified experts. Where facts end, we'll make that clear. Where questions remain unanswered, we'll say that too. And that's exactly what makes this case so difficult to ignore. Before we continue, it's important to acknowledge that this story involves the death of a young man under circumstances authorities have not fully explained. We'll be discussing information drawn from autopsy findings, maritime emergency communications, and GPS timeline data connected to Nolan's disappearance. Nothing shown here is graphic, but the subject matter is undeniably heavy. If now isn't the right time for this kind of story, it's completely understandable to step away. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. This channel is dedicated to examining unresolved investigations through verified evidence, documented timelines, and official records. We believe unanswered questions deserve continued attention, especially when families are still searching for clarity. If that's the kind of reporting you value, consider subscribing and enabling notifications because this investigation continues to evolve and we'll be following every significant development as it unfolds. And before we dive deeper, let us know where you're watching from. This community stretches across the world, and every voice keeping this conversation alive helps ensure cases like Nolan's are never quietly forgotten. Because what investigators uncovered next changed the direction of this timeline entirely. The emergency recording raised serious questions, but the GPS data may have raised even bigger ones. According to the documented vessel tracking records, at 9:56 a.m. on the morning of July 4th, the 22-foot Triton vessel, registered to Jerry Atkinson, departed from the private dock near the El Camino Railroad area in Ocean Springs. From that point forward, every recorded movement of the boat would become a crucial part of reconstructing the final known hours before Nolan Wells disappeared. Wyatt Atkinson, the grandson of Jerry Atkinson, was one of the passengers aboard the vessel that morning. By 11:14 a.m., the boat had completed its roughly 10-mile journey across the Gulf and reached Horn Island. That timeline didn't come from someone's memory months later, it came from digital evidence. 4 days after Nolan disappeared, Mississippi Department of Marine Resources officer Shay Smith extracted data directly from the boat's Garmin GPS system, converted it into a GPX file, and overlaid the route onto Google Earth satellite imagery. From that point on, every recorded movement of the vessel became a central focus of the investigation. Horn Island is nothing like a vacation destination. There are no hotels, no restaurants, no paved roads. It's a remote barrier island within the Gulf Islands National Seashore, reachable only by boat, but every 4th of July, hundreds of people gather there to celebrate. Officials estimated that nearly 200 people were spread across the island and surrounding waters that afternoon. Among them was Nolan Wells. He wasn't alone either. Several of his longtime friends had traveled to the island separately, including Warren Hudson, who had known Nolan since middle school. Hudson later said he checked in with Nolan multiple times throughout the day and never noticed anything unusual. Another close friend, Tim Shepard, was also on the island with a different group. Then, during the afternoon, something happened that briefly sent the investigation in the wrong direction. Around 3:30 p.m., a fight broke out on the island. A video of the confrontation quickly began circulating online, and many people initially believed Nolan was the person involved. But that narrative changed when Tim Shepard publicly identified himself as the individual in the footage. In interviews with Rolling Stone and ABC News, Shepard explained that he had been confronted by a stranger, and that the voice heard in the video was his, not Nolan's self. His account was later supported by several people who said they witnessed the incident firsthand, including his girlfriend, his uncle, and a family friend. That clarification eliminated one major misunderstanding, but it also narrowed investigators' attention toward a much more important question: where was Nolan after that? The Jackson County Sheriff's Office, under Sheriff John Ledbetter, urged anyone who had original, unedited photos or videos from Horn Island that day to come forward, especially footage that could help establish the timeline surrounding any reported confrontations. Investigators were attempting to separate online speculation from verifiable evidence. According to both witnesses and law enforcement, the last confirmed sighting of Nolan Wells occurred at approximately 3 p.m. on Horn Island. After that, events began unfolding rapidly. The Triton vessel reportedly started taking on water because of a mechanical issue. Those aboard were suddenly faced with decisions about whether to remain at the island or return to shore. According to multiple accounts, the situation became increasingly urgent. Then came one of the most disputed moments in the entire case. At 4:31 p.m., GPS records indicate that the Triton departed Horn Island. Nolan Wells was not aboard. Warren Hudson later stated that someone on the boat called out to Nolan before leaving. According to Hudson, Nolan was standing near the shoreline with a young woman identified publicly only as Katie. Hudson claimed Nolan was asked to return to the boat but decided to stay behind, while those on board focused on dealing with the reported mechanical emergency. That version of events was later echoed publicly by Chancery Court Judge Ashley Cole, Warren Hudson's mother. In a Facebook post, she wrote that her son last saw Nolan at approximately 3 p.m., and that the group left around 4:30 p.m. because the vessel's bilge pump had failed. According to her statement, the reported mechanical failure explained why the boat departed when it did. But not everyone accepted that explanation. Nolan's father, Elmore Wanley, has repeatedly challenged that account. Speaking during an interview with CBS Mornings, he said his son was not the type of person who separated from his friends without a reason. According to him, Nolan always stayed with the group, making the circumstances surrounding his absence from the departing boat all the more difficult for the family to understand. And that this agreement would soon become only the beginning. Because what happened after the boat left Horn Island, and what the digital evidence appears to show next, would raise even more questions than answers. According to Nolan's father, that explanation never made sense. He has said that if Nolan arrived with a group, he would have returned with that same group. That was the way he had been raised, and in his view, it was how his son always handled situations. Elmore questioned why, if the boat was truly dealing with an emerge. Wyatt Atkinson, the grandson of Jerry Atkinson, was one of the passengers aboard the vessel that morning. By 11:14 a.m., the boat had completed its roughly 10-mile journey across the Gulf and reached Horn Island. That timeline didn't come from someone's memory months later, it came from digital evidence. 4 days after Nolan disappeared, Mississippi Department of Marine Resources officer Shay Smith extracted data directly from the boat's Garmin GPS system, converted it into a GPX file, and overlaid the route onto Google Earth satellite imagery. From that point on, every recorded movement of the vessel became a central focus of the investigation. Horn Island is nothing like a vacation destination. There are no hotels, no restaurants, no paved roads. It's a remote barrier island within the Gulf Islands National Seashore, reachable only by boat, but every 4th of July, hundreds of people gather there to celebrate. Officials estimated that nearly 200 people were spread across the island and surrounding waters that afternoon. Among them was Nolan Wells. He wasn't alone either. Several of his longtime friends had traveled to the island separately, including Warren Hudson, who had known Nolan since middle school. Hudson later said he checked in with Nolan multiple times throughout the day and never noticed anything unusual. Another close friend, Tin Shepard, was also on the island with a different group. Then, during the afternoon, something happened that briefly sent the investigation in the wrong direction. Around 3:30 p.m., a fight broke out on the island. A video of the confrontation quickly began circulating online, and many people initially believed Nolan was the person involved. But that narrative changed when Tin Shepard publicly identified himself as the individual in the footage. In interviews with Rolling Stone and ABC News, Shepard explained that he had been confronted by a stranger, and that the voice heard in the video was his, not Nolan's self. His account was later supported by several people who said they witnessed the incident firsthand, including his girlfriend, his uncle, and a family friend. That clarification eliminated one major misunderstanding. But it also narrowed investigators' attention toward a much more important question: where was Nolan after that? The Jackson County Sheriff's Office, under Sheriff John Ledbetter, urged anyone who had original, unedited photos or videos from Horn Island that day to come forward, especially footage that could help establish the timeline surrounding any reported confrontations. Investigators were attempting to separate online speculation from verifiable evidence. According to both witnesses and law enforcement, the last confirmed sighting of Nolan Wells occurred at approximately 3 p.m. on Horn Island. After that, events began unfolding rapidly. The Triton vessel reportedly started taking on water because of a mechanical issue. Those aboard were suddenly faced with decisions about whether to remain at the island or return to shore. According to multiple accounts, the situation became increasingly urgent. Then came one of the most disputed moments in the entire case. At 4:31 p.m., GPS records indicate that the Triton departed Horn Island. Nolan Wells was not aboard. Warren Hudson later stated that someone on the boat called out to Nolan before leaving. According to Hudson, Nolan was standing near the shoreline with a young woman identified publicly only as Katie. Hudson claimed Nolan was asked to return to the boat but decided to stay behind, while those on board focused on dealing with the reported mechanical emergency. That version of events was later echoed publicly by Chancery Court Judge Ashley Cole, Warren Hudson's mother. In a Facebook post, she wrote that her son last saw Nolan at approximately 3 p.m., and that the group left around 4:30 p.m. because the vessel's bilge pump had failed. According to her statement, the reported mechanical failure explained why the boat departed when it did. But not everyone accepted that explanation. Nolan's father, Elmore Wanley, has repeatedly challenged that account. Speaking during an interview with CBS Mornings, he said his son was not the type of person who separated from his friends without a reason. According to him, Nolan always stayed with the group, making the circumstances surrounding his absence from the departing boat all the more difficult for the family to understand. And that this agreement would soon become only the beginning. Because what happened after the boat left Horn Island, and what the digital evidence appears to show next, would raise even more questions than answers. According to Nolan's father, that explanation never made sense. He has said that if Nolan arrived with a group, he would have returned with that same group. That was the way he had been raised, and in his view, it was how his son always handled situations. Elmore questioned why, if the boat was truly dealing with an emerge. Is he dead? The third appeared to include what some interpreted as an instruction to check someone's chest. It's important to be precise here. Those background sounds have not been officially authenticated or interpreted by law enforcement. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has not publicly confirmed, denied, or explained what those voices may represent. Officials have also not announced whether the audio is part of any active forensic review. Likewise, although Sheriff John Ledbetter has confirmed that the FBI is assisting with digital evidence in the broader investigation, federal authorities have not publicly commented on those specific background sounds. What is established is much narrow, but no less significant. The recording is authentic. It has been publicly released. It has been obtained through official channels, and portions of it have been broadcast nationally. Wake up, I'm a moderate senator and David Bondi. Within that same recording, the dispatcher is told that everyone aboard the vessel is fine. At the very same time, the enhanced background audio has fueled questions because some listeners believe it appears inconsistent with that reassurance. Whether those sounds mean what people think they hear remains unconfirmed, but they have become one of the most closely examined aspects of the case. Digital evidence, however, raises an entirely different set of questions. Witnesses can remember events differently, stories can change over time, perceptions can be challenged. A GPS unit doesn't rely on memory, it records coordinates, speed, direction, and precise timestamps. It has no reason to adjust its version of events. On July 8, 4 days after Nolan Wells disappeared, Mississippi Department of Marine Resources Officer Shay Smith downloaded the navigation data directly from the Triton's Garmin GPS system. That information was converted into a GPX file and mapped onto Google Earth satellite imagery by investigators. CBS News later obtained the records and published details from that timeline on July 15th, allowing the vessel's movements to be examined minute by minute. According to those documented records, 4:31 p.m. marks the moment the Triton departed Horn Island. Nolan Wells was not on board. What happened next has received significant attention because it does not resemble the rapid escape some people expected after hearing the emergency call. For approximately 53 minutes from 4:31 p.m. until around 5:24 p.m., the vessel covered only about 2.7 miles. Its recorded speed fluctuated between approximately 0.06 knots and 4.2 knots. At times, the boat was moving only slightly faster than drifting. At other moments, it traveled at roughly the pace of a person walking. During that same period, the sea tow call describing a boat taking on water was taking place. During that same period, dispatch was told the vessel urgently needed assistance, yet the GPS data documents a boat moving slowly across open water rather than making an immediate run towards shore. Exactly what that indicates remains a matter of interpretation, but the timeline itself is documented. Then, the pattern changes. After that extended period of slow movement, the GPS records show the vessel increasing speed and heading directly back toward the mainland. At 5:44 p.m., the Triton arrived at the El Camino Railroad dock, the same private dock from which it had departed earlier that morning. It remained there for approximately 8 minutes. Then, instead of remaining docked, the vessel departed again. At 5:52 p.m., GPS records show the boat traveling east into Fort Bayou. By 6:06 p.m., it had returned to the El Camino Railroad dock once more. But the movements didn't stop there. The vessel departed again, this time following a route southwest towards St. Martin Bayou, then southeast in the direction of the Biloxi Bay Bridge area, before eventually turning north. Those additional movements have become another part of the timeline investigators have examined while reconstructing the events of July 4th. Finally, at 7:19 p.m., GPS data places the Triton at the Fort Bayou boat launch. Less than half an hour later, at 7:47 p.m., the boat was loaded onto a trailer and transported overland to Cardinal Lane in Biloxi, identified in public reporting as the Atkinson family residence. By then, the boat's journey was over. But the investigation into what happened before it reached shore was only beginning. Midnight was the moment Nolan Wells was officially reported missing. That was when his mother, Christine Wells Wanley, contacted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office after hours of waiting for her son to come home. By then, however, the timeline had already moved far ahead. According to the documented GPS records, the Triton had been removed from the water, transported away from the public dock, and taken to a private residence more than 4 hours before Nolan was formally reported missing. That sequence has continued to draw attention. Warren Hudson later offered an explanation for at least movements after returning to the mainland. He said the group needed to stop because the vessel required a replacement drain plug before it could continue moving. That explanation accounts for one stop. The GPS data, however, documents multiple separate movements after the boat first reached shore. Publicly, only one has been specifically addressed. The remaining movements have not been fully explained in official interviews or public statements. Whether those additional trips prove significant remains unknown, but they remain part of the documented timeline investigators have reviewed. If you're following this investigation closely, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications enabled. As verified information continues to emerge, every confirmed development helps build a clearer picture of what happened on July 4th. Because after investigators reconstructed the boat's movements, attention shifted toward the people on board. Among everyone connected to that day, Warren Hudson has spoken publicly more than almost anyone else. From the beginning, his account remained largely consistent. He described Nolan as one of his closest friends since the 8th grade, and said he had checked on him several times throughout the afternoon. According to Hudson, Nolan appeared normal each time they spoke. His explanation for the departure was straightforward. When the boat prepared to leave Horn Island, Nolan chose to remain behind. That was the central narrative. Later, during an appearance on the Officer Tatum show hosted by Brandon Tatum, Hudson shared additional details, but according to Hudson, Nolan was standing near a young woman, publicly identified only as Katie, and instead of boarding the vessel, he decided to stay on the island. Hudson also repeated that the reported mechanical failure, the boat allegedly taking on water, created an urgent situation that influenced everything that followed. He then described what happened after the group returned to shore. According to Hudson, he contacted a friend named Javon to obtain Christine Wells Wanley's phone number. When he learned she hadn't heard from Nolan, Hudson said he personally contacted the U.S. Coast Guard around 11 p.m., providing Nolan's description, what he had been wearing, the last known location, details about the boat, and the conditions on the water. Then another interview introduced a detail that had not previously appeared. During a later public interview, Hudson explained that just before the boat departed, someone informed him that his younger brother had become involved in a fight elsewhere on the island. According to Hudson, his attention immediately shifted. He said that distraction is the reason who cannot fully account for Nolan's final moments before the vessel left Horn Island. That explanation was new. It was absent from his earliest public statements. It appeared only in a later interview. Whether that reflects additional recollection or something else has not been determined publicly. What is documented is simply the order in which those details became part of the public record. It's also important to note that Warren Hudson has cooperated with investigators and has not been charged with any crime related to this case. While questions continued surrounding witness accounts, another issue remained unresolved. When the Triton returned without Nolan, his phone and keys were reportedly still on the boat. Trying to locate him, Christine Wells Wanley and family friend Toshima Hans used both Life 360 and Snapchat to track the device. The results didn't match. Each application pointed to a different location for the same phone. Following the Snapchat location eventually led them to a private residence where numerous people were reportedly present. Christine has also publicly stated that she believes messages were removed from Nolan's phone before it was returned to the family. That allegation has not been confirmed through any publicly released forensic examination. At this stage, it remains a claim made by Nolan's mother as she continues seeking answers. Then, on July 15th, civil rights attorney Ben Crump announced that both the family and law enforcement had reached an agreement regarding the phone's examination. Under that arrangement, attorney Eric Hertz, working alongside attorney Liza Park on the family's independent investigation, would participate in a joint inspection of the device with law enforcement officials. According to the agreement, experts representing both the family and the district attorney's office, led by district attorney Angel Myers McIlrath, would examine the phone at the same time so that neither side reviewed its contents before the other. As of the latest confirmed public reporting, that joint forensic review had not yet taken place, so the phone remains another unanswered chapter in this investigation, a device that should have been with Nolan, messages that may or may not still exist, and an agreed-upon examination that, publicly at least, had yet to happen. Then the search reached its most devastating moment. On July 6th, a U.S. National Park Service ranger discovered Nolan Wells' body in the waters off the northwestern shoreline of Horn Island. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind later confirmed Nolan's identity using dental records. The following day, July 7th, the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office performed the official autopsy. Those findings have not been publicly released. They have also not been provided to Nolan's family. According to District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath, that is standard procedure. She explained that autopsy results in suspicious or non-natural death investigations are typically presented to a grand jury before being released more broadly. She also emphasized that convening a grand jury does not automatically indicate criminal wrongdoing. It is simply part of the legal process while the investigation remains active. The family chose not to wait. On July 10th, 4 days after Nolan's body was recovered, they arranged for an independent autopsy. It was performed by Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, Jr., a board-certified forensic pathologist whose career includes serving as chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., leading the National Medical Association, and chairing the Department of Pathology at Howard University College of Medicine. His findings would soon introduce another major development, one that added an entirely new layer of scrutiny to an investigation already filled with unanswered questions. The family's search for independent answers quickly gained support from several high-profile figures. Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Rights camp helped fund the independent autopsy, while Tyler Perry separately covered Nolan's funeral expenses. Their involvement brought additional national attention to a case that was already raising difficult questions. On July 22, civil rights attorney Ben Crump announced the preliminary findings of that independent examination during the 117th NAACP National Convention at McCormick Place in Chicago. Standing beside him were Nolan's parents, Christine Wells Wanley and Elmore Wanley. The conclusions were striking in their uncertainty. 3 findings, 3 unanswered questions. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined. Estimated time of death, unknown. According to Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr., several significant limitations prevented him from reaching definitive forensic conclusions. The first limitation stood out immediately. When Nolan's body arrived for the independent examination, the trachea and thyroid bone were not included. Those structures had been retained during the original state autopsy. Dr. Mitchell explained in his report that, in forensic practice, those anatomical structures may be preserved for additional examination when investigators believe they could provide important information. Because they were unavailable, he stated that he could not determine whether evidence of neck injury was present or absent. That question remained unresolved. Authorities have not publicly explained that difference, and no official statement has addressed when or how his clothing may have changed. This investigation continues to draw nationwide attention, and several key developments remain pending. If you're following this case, stay with us as we continue tracking every verified update through official records, court filings, and confirmed investigative developments. Here's where the investigation stands today. According to Sheriff John Ledbetter, investigators have interviewed more than 60 witnesses connected to the events surrounding July 4th. He has also confirmed that the FBI is assisting with portions of the digital evidence review. According to the sheriff, federal involvement is standard because Horn Island is located within the federally managed Gulf Islands National Seashore. Separately, the FBI told ABC News that agents have also been addressing reported interstate threats directed toward individuals connected with the investigation. Meanwhile, several people believed to have first-hand knowledge of events that day have retained private legal counsel. The background audio from the Sea Taw emergency call remains another unanswered issue. To date, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office has issued no public statement confirming, disputing, or interpreting the enhanced background sounds discussed publicly. Likewise, the agreed-upon joint forensic examination of Nolan's phone, announced by Ben Crump, Attorney Eric Hertz, and District Attorney Angel Myers McIllerath, had not yet been completed according to the latest confirmed reporting. The grand jury process also remains pending. Officials have stated that proceedings will begin once investigators determine the case is ready, and no public timetable has been announced. The search itself unfolded rapidly. After Warren Hudson said he contacted the U.S. Coast Guard around 11 p.m. on July 4th, an organized search began the following morning involving the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and the Volunteer United Cajun Navy, whose members assisted law enforcement in searching the surrounding waters. On the morning of July 6th, a National Park Service ranger located Nolan's body near the northwestern shoreline of Horn Island. Since then, Christine Wells Wanley has filed court documents seeking appointment as administrator of her son's estate. There were no television cameras, no major announcement, no public celebration of progress. Just a grieving mother completing paperwork no parent ever expects to sign, and despite everything investigators have gathered, several critical questions remain unanswered. Authorities have not publicly explained how Nolan entered the water. The documented GPS timeline still leaves questions about why the vessel traveled slowly for roughly 53 minutes after declaring a mechanical emergency. The enhanced background audio from the Sea Taw call has not received an official public interpretation. The findings contained within the state's sealed autopsy report remain unavailable while the investigation continues. Dr. Mitchell's inability to examine the retained neck structures has fueled additional questions, but no public explanation has addressed that issue beyond the documented forensic process. The boat's additional movements after returning to shore also remain part of the timeline investigators have reconstructed, and the contents of Nolan's phone have yet to be publicly examined through the agreed-upon joint review. For now, those questions remain unanswered. The investigation continues. The grand jury has no publicly announced deadline, and Nolan's parents continue waiting for the answers they have sought since the night their son never came home. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He was a college student, a wide receiver, a son. On the morning of July 4th, he told his mother he loved her before walking out the front door. Everything that happened after that remains the subject of an active investigation, continuing forensic review, and ongoing legal proceedings. If this case has stayed with you, tell us in the comments which verified question you believe investigators most need to answer next. We'll continue following every confirmed development as it becomes public. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us as this investigation continues.